live. This is where I like to point at the camera because of the visual it does. Welcome to the show.
I think I can wear my earrings and...
Am I doing the thing?
Soon I discovered that this rock thing was true. Jesus was the devil. All of a sudden, I found myself in love with the world. So there was only one thing that I could do, was listen to KBMF LP Butte.
ID?
Something to do.
We're going to do an ID after this, and then it'll be your turn.
KBMF is generously supported by Collective Elevation Butte, offering natural medicine for anxiety, pain, and sleep at 34 East Galena Street. Collective Elevation also offers weekly doctor appointments. They're open 7 days a week, 11 to 7 weekdays, and 11 to 5 on weekends. For more information, find Collective Elevation on Facebook or by phone at 565-5850.
Got it. Go.
Welcome to my art form.
It's time for Post-Orthodoxy, the show about changing our minds.
Yeah, baby.
With your hosts, Dark and Ainsley Sevier.
Maybe what they believe about reality isn't all of reality.
Kevin Neal Olson.
I know, right?
We're on a mission to
Kevin Neal
better
Olson
time
is
with more people more
our
often.
first person to sign up.
Post-Orthodoxy explores strong beliefs, how those belief systems divide or connect people, and what might be found beyond those reality bubbles.
Keep calm, don't lose your head.
I've got a piece of chocolate here with me because I got anxiety about doing this.
Welcome to this neighborhood, neighbor.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to the neighborhood. This is Ainsley Sevier and Citizen DJ Dark Sevier
Present.
in the KBMF studios live on the Richest Soul on Earth. Thank you so much to the Noracle for that fantastic show, Songs of Love and Horror.
She's got nice taste in music.
And the sweet shout out too.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was like, they're going to be talking about self-awareness and self-care and self-soothing and selfishness and
Lots of other selves.
lots of kinds of selves. Plus, we're going to be doing our regularly scheduled coronavirus update, conversation, and the Black Lives Matter update. Because we're pretty much on both of those tracks these days.
Right, it's news.
It is.
James Juarez says yeah.
Let's see. James Juarez, that's terror time.
Yes.
One of our KBMF DJs right there.
Astrid Selling.
Foreign
checked in.
correspondent from Sweden.
She said hey, but in
Is
Swedish.
that, I wish, do you say, or heh?
I think
Hey. Maybe the J makes a Y sound.
I'm gonna say hey.
Hey.
I'm glad that we have our foreign correspondent on for today's show. We're gonna do our coronavirus updates.
She's been very active in a conversation on my Facebook timeline about masks or not masks because she lives in Sweden, and Sweden was one of the few countries that didn't force most of the rules.
They didn't go with the orthodoxy.
We have some very interesting information about, questions maybe you might want to be asking yourself.
Right, I followed
about
that.
What's going on.
I followed some of that conversation over do you wear a mask or not wear a mask, and you posted it not to know if people wore a mask or didn't wear a mask.
Oh no.
What was can you tell me the context under which you posted that question?
I posted that question because Kirk Jones is on board today on our Facebook timeline. He was he's a DJ alumnus from the Jolly Roger.
Oh,
which
right
is
on.
my kid co-hosted talk radio show.
Hi, welcome aboard.
So what I was seeing was something that I think of as virtue signaling, which is trying to let everybody know you're a good person stuff, right? So what I was seeing on my timeline was a bunch of people answering this question. You can do this thing on Facebook where it's like, do you think pineapple should be on pizza, yes or no? And then everybody answers the same question. You get to see each other's results.
Right.
But this one was, do you wear a mask in public, yes or no?
Yes or no. No other.
You're not supposed to say
Qualifying.
why you do,
No qualifying.
which most people were breaking those rules. They would write something like, yes, because I care about you.
We don't know how to follow rules.
I have to let you know that I really care about wearing a mask in public.
Really care.
Right. Not just that I do it, but why I do it. Because that's why I do it, because of the why. Is because I care.
Because you care, yes.
Right. So I screenshot that question because I wasn't trying to get people to answer that question for Facebook anymore.
The schema.
No. I was trying to get, I posted it and I was like, hey folks, I've seen almost every single one of you who have said yes to this question, not wearing a mask in a public place.
It's almost like they dress up for church and then go back to their sinful ways outside of Facebook.
And my joy in life is not calling hypocrisy. I have, I guess, an ingrained fetish around the proper practice of your own dang religion.
Yeah.
Radio safe words, if you have a religion that you're practicing, which in this case is we definitely must wear masks for health and safety and because we love our fellow human beings, then I can scoot closer, baby. It's better to not move it. I'm serious. Like, if I need to scoot closer, I'll scoot closer.
You're the pretty girl. I just wanted to make sure.
That's so sweet.
Take up the whole thing.
I was just saying, hey y'all, y'all are saying on Facebook in the public sphere that you wear masks in public. Yes. Yeah. Except that I've seen all of you, almost all of the people, and I didn't call anybody out. I was just like, maybe something to notice about yourself, that you like to think of yourself as someone who wears a mask in public because you care about humanity, and you either care about people or you care about money. That's how this mask question has just devolved.
It's really bad.
It's really devolved. But I don't know. I just kind of like as a person who like strongly who like really closely followed a very rules-based totalitarian religion for the first 25 years of her life, like I can spot a poorly followed religion from a mile away.
Sure.
And so I was just kind of like trying to raise an awareness campaign, like if you're being inconsistent in your religious practice, why?
Right. We're dealing with this every week on this show now. We're dealing with coronavirus, and also the mask has become an unfortunate aspect of our general meaning crisis in this country.
The struggle.
We don't have good sources of meaning. So many of our sources of meaning have broken down. So for a lot of people, religion used to be the source of meaning, but then...
How you know what's going on, what's good.
Right, but then there's been problems with organized religion, where people then still like, well, I'm still Christian, but that guy that, has the 4 yachts and the thing makes me a little problematic. So there's problems over, same thing with the government, where our governmental agencies, which is supposed to be a reflection of us,
right? Our government is supposed to be
representing us. Right, well, there's all across the spectrum, people are saying, well, I don't know if I fully trust all the information that I'm getting from my governmental agencies. And the same thing with our media, unfortunately. And this is not just a right-wing thing. Like, if you are getting your news that has a good chunk of commercials in between the bits, I'm going to say it's suspect.
Yeah, because the news station
is commercial. It's a commercial.
Paid by those commercials.
Right. It's a commercial enterprise that is giving you information about your life. And so necessarily that information is overall going to have some skew towards the corporate overlords.
Right.
I have to say that. It's true. So the mask thing is problematic because now we've taken a medical issue, we've made it a political issue. Mm-hmm. So if you didn't care one way or the other, if you cared one way or the other, suddenly your caring falls on one side of a political divide, which is problematical for folks like myself.
Problematical.
So I don't think that a health issue should have a political alliance. I don't feel like that's the way it's supposed to work.
Well, when it has a political alliance or when a health issue has a religious alliance, such as women's health care and abortion, you stop being able to evaluate the science of the thing and begin to feel like you have to have a certain opinion in order to align with your strongly held beliefs, whether those are strongly held political beliefs or strongly held religious beliefs.
Right, so you had the comment, and it's a problematic phrase because, and I'd like to, before we go into it, I'd like to talk about my social distancing habit exercised conscientiously on Saturday.
Yeah.
So we had a farmer's market. Mm-hmm. The idea is don't go coughing on folks, so wear a mask. Or social distance. 6 feet apart is the thing that people say, 6 feet apart.
Right.
So if you are not wearing a mask, there are some folks that I feel are using masks, and their usage is based more in virtue signaling than in the actual science of the wearing of the mask. So just safe than sorry, better safe than sorry is kind of the easiest way to put it. So me walking down the road with about a 12-foot berth on all sides,
Right.
nobody around me, I'm not snorting and coughing and sneezing, I'm just walking down the road,
Right.
no mask, no mask,
Okay.
right? I got some shade from folks.
Dirty looks.
Why are you not wearing a mask in public?
Nobody said it, but.
Because that's not the prescription, even if you're wearing a mask in public. The idea is social distancing.
Right.
Now, I have some facts to read, some current facts that I've read from a source, and you can question the source, or you can find other sources if you want, but I want to read some facts, because I think that's important to interject into all this sort of social angst over a medical issue. So I made sure to keep my distance from people. I had a bandana around my neck, and I found that is my favorite new thing. So I just put a bandana around my neck.
Which makes you look like a person
Who
who
might-
at some point cares.
I have a level of care.
Right, to the people who think that mask wearing has to do with whether you care.
Right. So for me, it's not worth it for me to burn all the friendships of frightened people.
Well, that's
Because
a strong word.
There's some people or
People who think the science says mask wearing is important.
right, that's one perspective. It's one aspect of the scientific view,
Right.
which is new. That's a new thing. Traditional wisdom was you only wear the mask if you yourself are infected, or you're in a room with an infected, or somebody who's susceptible to being infected. That was traditional WHO, CDC, canonical wisdom around the mask. For some reason, that wisdom changed with this virus, which I don't think has to do with this particular virus, which I find really interesting. Anyway, so I'm walking around. I have the bandana. That virtue signals a level of care. If I have to go talk to somebody close up, if I have to conspire with them about something and I have to narrow the 6-foot gap, and they are 75 years old,
right?
I'll maybe put on the mask if that's what they would like me to do.
Right. So you're talking about radical consent language.
Right.
You're talking about when you approach someone, do you want to
Do
hug
you
or
want
are
to
you
hug
not
or not
hugging?
a hug? Do you want to
Would you like me to wear a mask?
I can do that. Otherwise, I'm not walking around outside with the mask on. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
We don't live in New York where you're crowded shoulder to shoulder on the sidewalk.
Okay.
I often have blocks between me and other people. I don't need to wear a mask walking down the street in Montana while I'm walking my dog. And so I'm fascinated by the shade and the dirty looks I get from people by being in public without a mask. Being in public with a mask, I think there are things to that. How close are you to people? Are you feeling bad? Are you feeling ill? Are you symptomatic? If you're symptomatic, then geez, yes, wear a mask.
If you're
Stay home
symptomatic,
altogether.
don't go to the farmer's market.
Exactly. So
we ran into a friend. For context, I guess, we ran into a friend who struggles with very intense autoimmune diseases.
Yes.
And she was wearing a homemade mask, and I don't just mean like a ripply piece of fabric. I mean like it was a Hannibal Lecter, all the way down under her chin, all the way up over her nose, form-fitting, so it wasn't coming out her face or her nose or up above. And she also had at least 2, maybe 3 surgical masks underneath that homemade mask. So she was sandwiched with like surgical masks under this Hannibal mask, and that's how we were talking to her. And she was going around and gloves. And keeping distance from everybody.
Right.
And I know for a fact that she wipes down all of her stuff when she brings it home. And
good for her.
Like, I feel like that's important if you are a person who's afraid you might die from COVID-19.
Sure, if you're concerned and you need to go get your vegetables, protect yourself.
Yes, totally.
I think she's doing due diligence, and that's great. I don't know if wearing all those masks is like, again, it's up to her.
It depends on how much she's washing them. It depends on what she touches before she puts them on her face.
She's taking care of herself.
She's trying really hard
on that front, and I really appreciate it.
Our foreign correspondent Astrid from Sweden says the and/or is the problem. Like, wear a mask and/or social distance. Even if you wear a mask, you are supposed to stay 6 feet apart.
Yes.
The mask comes in third. Sanitization, then distancing, and then masks.
Yeah, don't walk around coughing on people.
Which I think is a very important conversation to be having, because there's talk in the US of mandating masks, and yet I see so many people who wear masks and think that the mask is what's making them sanitary for everyone.
Well, that's the virtue signal.
And they're not washing their hands, and they're still hugging their friends, and they're not washing their car keys, and like,
So, our foreign correspondent, Astrid, was in a dialogue with a friend of ours, and he's very much, he seems to be a bit of an absolutist. It is yes or no, mask or no mask. And we've all seen, there's a billion memes out there about why people should wear masks. There's a billion memes.
Right.
And I don't know if that's real good science. Even though it looks good in a meme, I don't know if that's good science to be basing your actions on and judging other people on.
This coronavirus update, I think, is very important to our conversation about self-awareness and self-soothing. And we're going to keep wafting in and out of the subjects as we do on Post-Orthodoxy. I think it's very important to be aware of we have to be aware with the massive amounts of information available to us at all times from various positions, various spectrums, various sources of questionable trustworthiness, that we are going to be naturally more attracted to information that confirms what we already believe. Humans do not naturally like information that contradicts how we already think the world is. We naturally just don't like new information. And you can work really hard to become okay with hearing new information and to kind of find the stretchiness of encountering new information fun. Like people who run get off on the endorphins of running even though their bodies are tired afterwards. You can become excited about being able to change your mind and encounter new information. But I think it's really important to be aware that our primal instinct is to want to know what's going on in our environment, and that we know how we need to behave in order to survive. That's the animal instinct. And so when you go onto the online forum of all of the things available to you, you're going to be naturally more drawn to and or like facts that make sense to what you already think truth is.
Right.
So confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias is a big deal.
So Dark and I try really hard to watch, read, listen to, and encounter information that matches how the way we think things are, and also that contradicts how the way we think things are. I know that we have very strong opinions, but we're also very interested in hearing new information and contradictory stuff if it actually has
some basis
in science or reality behind it. And I think when one becomes self-aware that our animalistic instinct is to feel like we know how to be safe in our environment, then one can take a step further and become self-aware that we're going to like information that confirms the way we think the world is
we will
more.
Yes.
And then a step further is to become self-aware of, why do I think the world is that way, and therefore why do I like that information better? This is something that I keep trying to have conversations with people about, is this giant, massive fear of death thing going on around the coronavirus. There are a lot of people who are very adamant that we must just wear masks. Just do it.
Just do it.
Otherwise people will die. And the
why?
Subtext is, that would be bad.
That would be bad.
And that would be worse than usual.
Right.
And so there are these belief systems that you can become aware about in yourself, about why you think we all have to make sure nobody gets this virus, because everybody's going to get it. We're
probably all going to be exposed to it at some point in our life, if you're alive right now.
On the planet, everybody's going to be exposed to this virus.
There's something I want to go into deeper next week. There's a show I want to do next week where I want to look at what happened over controversies around HIV and AIDS, and the connection of HIV and AIDS.
We're going to do a whole show.
We're going to do a whole show on that, because I think it parallels to what we're doing right now with the COVID-19 situation. And briefly, one of the things
there are patterns in what happened with that health crisis that are happening again now.
And some of the same players, like Anthony Fauci, like these Tony Fauci, some of the same players. So, briefly, one of the controversies that piqued my interest around the era of HIV and AIDS, because that was the era in which I was hoping to have sexual intercourse with folks.
Yeah.
And that was always on everybody's mind when you started going to the club.
I like you, but have you been tested?
Have you been tested?
Right. That was the big thing in the 80s and 90s.
So, yes, so the news would talk about HIV infections, like the way we're doing the coronavirus testing positive.
Mm-hmm.
There would be the rising numbers of HIV infections. And they started doing HIV/AIDS, and then HIV/AIDS became the same thing in these codes. So if there was an HIV, somebody tested positive for HIV,
Mm-hmm.
then it was reported that there are new AIDS cases.
Mm-hmm.
Most people that got HIV never developed AIDS or symptoms of AIDS.
Okay.
So what we saw was everybody's got AIDS.
This virus.
Yeah.
No. HIV was a virus that everybody was encountering. Like tons of people.
Around. Lots of people had it and never had any ill effects.
Okay.
So it's, the idea was that having HIV meant you were susceptible to getting AIDS, or that was a component of getting AIDS. But they started reporting HIV and AIDS cases in the same breath.
As the same number.
So the vast majority of people with HIV did not develop AIDS problems, symptoms, or die.
Okay.
But the news was saying we all had AIDS because we all had HIV. That drove panic, that drove hysteria, that ruined careers. There was a boxer who was like, he could no longer box because
he might get punched and his blood would get on somebody and then they would have AIDS.
His whole career was ruined, and so he fought, and he was at the center of this battle over
people who never got to get married and have children.
Right, over the language around what's going on. So there was a lot of hysteria, and you could say it's science. Science has shown this has happened, but if you don't know how to interpolate, if you don't know how to understand the scientific method,
like, have you ever heard these words?
Science becomes a dogma and a religion that isn't serving you.
Right.
You're not getting good information.
I'm sorry, guys. We can't just blindly trust anyone.
We
cannot just find a new thing to just trust.
You can't say Christian beliefs because there's so many different kinds of Christians, and many Christians have very different beliefs from each other. You can't just say this is science and therefore it is settled.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point of science.
Is discovery.
Yes. So I would like to rattle off some facts, but do you want to do anything before we go into that? And we can comment on these things as we go.
Yeah, I think myself personally, when the COVID-19 thing happened, I think I would love to see a radical shift from calling it coronavirus to calling it COVID-19, because the common cold is coronavirus.
Yes. There's a lot of different coronavirus.
Right.
Coronavirus 19 is a very narrow, it's one of many.
Right. I would love to see us become more educated as a nation about how COVID-19 is one of the coronaviruses, and we are surrounded by coronaviruses all the time.
Yeah,
right?
We need to be really specific in our language.
Yeah. So when this awareness of COVID-19 version of coronavirus, of this particular virus being on the planet, started becoming widespread, which thanks internet, everybody knows about it now. I bleached the whole house, and I modified all my Airbnb settings so that people would feel safe if they felt like they still really had to travel.
Right.
We went out and bought a bunch of groceries and stayed home for like a month and a half or 2 months without seeing anybody or having any friends over. We canceled parties, engagements, and plans. We both had a lot of gigs canceled. And I, did a lot of research, and I shared this cattening the curve. Everybody loves cats. They're like, look, it's like pet the kitty. If you don't stay home, we won't flatten the curve. I shared this meme. I was really on board. And then the more that I read, the more that I studied a wide range of scientific articles and sources and data from various sides, the more that my personal beliefs my perspectives around coronavirus, around COVID-19 are shifting. And things like, in the beginning, I was really a strong proponent that we should all be doing all of these things to help each other. Social distancing, hand washing, and masks. We should all be doing all these things to help all of each other. That narrative suits me. I'm a very loving person and very self-sacrificial by nature and by nurture. And so I'm already automatically attracted to a worldview that says we should all be doing things to take care of everybody else. that made sense in my worldview. There are people out there of various genders and demographics who are not naturally or trained to be self-sacrificial for everybody else's well-being, and those were some of the first groups to rebel against just doing something to take care of everybody else. You know, there are some people who are like, well, you need to take care of your own self. And as time has gone on, and the more that I've read about the science of viruses, germ theory versus terrain theory, the science of immune boosting, immunocompromised systems, comorbidities, death rates as opposed to case rates, and comorbidities and death rates and demographics of death rates, the more it became clear to me, at least based on the data that I was finding, that it is the individual's job to be aware of their own immune system health and to protect themselves in the way that they feel is appropriate to their health. And that me, myself, Ainsley, wearing a mask it's not my job to wear a mask for other people's health. It's their job. So myself, if I have kidney failure, it's my job to social distance, sanitize my house, and wear a mask and order a grocery service.
And also let people know that that's where you're at, so they can help you. So they can be with you and they can take care of you, and so they can also not just go coughing in your face.
Right.
You need to be.
I have to tell
people aware.
I'm immunocompromised, so I need you to wear a mask when you're around me. You know. But I don't need Ainsley, in actual fact, don't need people to wear masks around me.
Well,
the point of the mask is to keep the stuff from getting out of you to the other person.
We started off the show with talking about the problematic nature of our meaning crisis and where you get your information.
Yeah.
So the WHO and the CDC, it was canon that you did not wear a mask unless you had symptoms or you were around somebody who had symptoms. And then they reversed their position, and now that is canon. Everybody is quoting the WHO and the CDC.
And the Surgeon General and Fauci.
Right, and the mask. So the WHO just came out saying that coronavirus patients who don't show symptoms, these are the asymptomatic coronavirus.
The World Health
folks,
Organization.
the WHO, World Health Organization, said non-symptomatic people who have been tested positive for COVID-19, it is a very rare thing where they have found that is a driving spread of the virus. In very rare cases does an asymptomatic person spread the virus.
Viral shed enough for you to get sick off of them.
Right, so that is something that needs to be included into, now have we already gone down the road where it's just mask or not mask, where we cannot integrate new information? Well, I think that should change some behaviors. If you know that, if the fear of the doorknobs.
We said asymptomatic was a problem, but what we've learned is it's not really a problem.
We're finding out otherwise. So are we willing to be flexible and take in new information, or do we now just distrust the organization that has given us the current dogma that we're subscribing to? So I want to read from, incidentally, I found this page. It's called the Swiss Policy Research. And incidentally, we have our Swiss correspondent, so she can chime in at any point on these things.
Okay.
They're running a updated list, a constantly updated list of the facts that we have discovered about COVID-19.
Okay.
This is not theory. This is the facts that they have discovered at this point with the studies that they've done. So I'd like to read some of these because I think it might make some people who are open to new information feel better about the situation. Other people, they may just
people just need to know what to do to save everyone.
Right. Albert Camus in 1947 said, "The only means to fight the plague is honesty."
Ooh.
So we're going to do an overview of some of the facts, some of the latest facts.
Okay.
According to the latest immunological and serological studies, the overall lethality of COVID-19 is about 0.1%. And so that is within the range of a strong seasonal flu.
So far, over the 6 or 7 months that we've been tracking coronavirus deaths,
right,
the overall lethality of all those deaths, only 0.1%
amount
of people who get it
which is about the range of a strong seasonal flu that hits us.
So that's a 1/10%, right?
That's going to be difficult for some people because that's what Trump said it was.
Right. There are a lot of people that just don't want that fact to be true because Trump said it's like the cold.
So Trump lies all the time. Then if he says something true, people are inclined not to believe him, which I think is really dangerous.
Or they just don't like his face.
You just need to find another source of your information. I'm using Swiss policy research, not DJT. So that's one. So that's what we're coming to, 0.1%. That's the lethality. Now, the second, in countries like the US, the UK, and also Sweden, without a lockdown, overall mortality since the beginning of the year is in the range of a strong influenza season. In countries like Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, overall mortality is in the range of a mild influenza season. So, number 3, even in global hotspots, the risk of death for the general population of school and working age is typically in the range of a daily car ride to work. So that's your risk. Your risk of getting killed in a car wreck on the way to work is about the same as getting this, or dying from this. The risk was initially overestimated because many people with only mild or no symptoms were not taken into account. Fact number 4, over 80% of all test-positive persons remain symptom-free.
Okay.
So
wow.
Yeah, even among 70 to 79-year-olds, about 60% remain symptom-free. My dad is in his mid-80s. He tested positive for coronavirus in Tulsa.
Has no symptoms.
Has no symptoms. My mom was concerned, so she got tested and came out negative. He got his test where she got her test then, also came out negative.
So he's had a positive and a negative in 2 different towns.
Right. So over 95% of all persons develop at most moderate symptoms.
Okay.
At most.
At most, but 80%, so maybe there's like 10% of people who develop
15.
maybe moderate symptoms.
Right.
And then the last 10-ish%.
So up to 60% of all persons may already have a certain cellular background immunity to COVID-19 due to contact with previous coronaviruses, such as common cold viruses.
Which is also coronavirus.
The initial assumption that there was no immunity against COVID-19 was not correct.
Okay.
So they're dispelling an early trope that turned out to be not true.
Well, it was an early... That's how science works.
Right.
You make a hypothesis, and then you look at all the data and see if your hypothesis is true. We hypothesized that asymptomatic carriers was a big problem.
Now we're saying it's not true.
And we hypothesized, what was the second thing you just said?
The median age of the the median age of deceased in most countries. The initial assumption was that there was no immunity against COVID-19.
Right, but what they're finding out is that there are some people who have definitely been exposed who are not getting it.
Who have immunity.
So that's how science works.
Right.
Is you make a hypothesis.
So that's good. That makes it should make it a little less scary for some folks.
Yeah.
So the median age of the deceased in most countries, including Italy, is over 80 years. E.g., 86 years in Sweden. And only 4% of the deceased had no serious preconditions. So that means 96% of the people who died who were over 80 had some other thing going on.
Well, 96% of the people who died from coronavirus, from COVID-19.
Over 80.
Over 80.
Yeah.
So they're saying most of the deaths, that's what median means. You can research range, median, mode, and mean, MEAN, to help you understand how statistics are formulated. But the median means that most of the people who die from COVID-19 are over 80.
Yep.
And only 96% of the people over 80 who died from COVID-19
had some other business.
Were already sick in some way.
So what that comes down to is the age and risk profile of deaths, thus essentially corresponds to normal mortality.
Okay, that's what our foreign correspondent Astrid is saying in Sweden. We are now down on, quote, no over death number. That's what they call it.
Right.
Similar to other years.
Normal mortality.
Normal mortality rates.
Right, and they're not running around with masks on,
And that's all
they're doing
deaths.
social distancing,
Yeah.
they're doing hand washing,
Mhm.
if you are at all sick, you are shunned and said you should be home, you should not be out in front. Right.
Right.
In many countries, up to 2/3 of all extra deaths occurred in nursing homes,
Which is sad, but
Right.
expected.
which do not benefit from general lockdown. Moreover, in many cases, it's not clear whether these people really died from COVID-19 or from weeks of extreme stress and isolation.
Yeah. Like fading kitten syndrome.
Right,
Sometimes
right.
kittens just die because they're not with their moms suddenly.
That's the thing. We like folks. We like to be around folks. Up to 30% of all additional deaths may have been caused not by COVID-19, but by the effects of the lockdown, panic, and fear. For example,
Isolation.
the treatment of heart attacks and strokes decreased by up to 60%
Oh, jeez.
because many patients no longer dare go to the hospital. So that is going to have an effect on our death toll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where's the comprehensive study of other mortality rates and how they've changed, such as suicide rates?
That's way too complicated
Death
just to have
by
a scary
abuse.
number. Even in the so-called COVID-19 deaths, it's often not clear whether they died from or with coronavirus. That's the thing I hit every week.
You're reading from the Swiss policy.
This is the Swiss policy research.
Where they're collecting current scientific data.
Right. So, so even the so-called COVID-19 deaths, it's often not clear whether they died from or with coronavirus, i.e. from underlying diseases, or if they were counted as presumed cases and not tested at all.
Oh.
However, official figures usually do not reflect this distinction. So,
such as what we learned recently, which is that the CDC was mixing together case numbers. So say Dark and I went and got tested, and I came up positive, as in I've got it, and I'm gonna, like it's live in me right now.
You have it.
I just was exposed a while ago, right?
And now you're tested positive.
So I'm positive. And
but
then
you don't have any...
Dark also tests quote unquote positive because he had it in January and he has the COVID-19 antibodies in his system.
Right, which means I'm building an immunity to it.
Both of those things are counted as a positive test and an uptick in test numbers.
And so was my dad's case.
Right.
So he tested positive. That's another positive case in the Oklahoma debacle.
Even though later that week he tested negative in prior.
Right.
So. And what didn't the Swiss place say that really yummy statistic that was, even though testing numbers are going up as testing becomes more widespread.
Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Okay. I only want to spend like maybe 5 or 10 more minutes on this, and then I want to get to branch into our self-awareness and self-care.
Let's just run to that.
Because I think this is important.
This is fact number 13. And I did post a link to this in our comments on the Facebook page if anybody wants to look at it. The often shown exponential curves of corona cases are misleading, as the number of tests also increased exponentially. In most countries, the ratio of positive tests to test overall, i.e. the positive rate, remained constant at 5 to 25%.
So even though we're testing way more people, still it's only still coming out that 5-ish% of the
5
people.
5 to 25.
5 to 25% of the people who are tested get it.
Right.
Have it.
So it was constant at 5 to 25 or increased only slightly. In many countries, the peak of the spread was already reached well before the lockdown. That's what they're finding.
Yeah.
So countries without curfews and contact bans, such as Japan, South Korea, Belarus, Sweden, have not experienced a more negative course of events than other countries. Sweden has claimed that they could have done things differently.
Especially in regards to the nursing homes.
Right, but apparently they're not suffering in...
They're not having any worse numbers.
Right. Sweden was even praised by the WHO and now benefits from a higher immunity compared to lockdown countries. So their bet on herd immunity seems to be panning out.
I think it's really important to understand how misleading statistics are. I think it's really important to take some time perhaps to educate yourself on how statistics are made, how to read statistics, how to look at source data yourself, because there's this really lovely New York Times graph chart that's been going around where it shows like France, Canada, Korea and the US, you know,
Right.
it's like 4 graphs.
Right.
And it shows like everybody's numbers peaking in like January, March, and then leveling out and continuing to be level.
Right.
And then the US peaks and then keeps peaking.
Yeah.
And it's like, that statistic, I would bet big money, is not regulated by population density.
Population density and or frequency of testing.
Right, I just
See,
mean
Donald
like,
Trump, people keep bashing Donald Trump, and I'm not
well,
a
let
Donald.
me finish
Yeah.
explaining why this graph, this
Same.
visual, that everybody sees that visual and says
Right.
the US sucks. The visual is that those other 3 countries did all their testing right away.
Mhm.
They all tested right away. They
Right.
all tested everyone right away. And the US is only just now testing. So our numbers were lower in the beginning because nobody was getting tested. And our numbers are higher now because we're testing a bunch of people. And it is also important to note that as our testing numbers, the data needs to be balanced. The jiggly line that makes you think the US is way worse than everybody else needs to be balanced out based on how much population we are going through percentage-wise,
Right.
as opposed to these other countries.
So according to the Swiss, the virus has been out there for a while. It's not going up or down. Our numbers are going up and down according to how we're testing for it.
Mhm.
That seems to be what they're coming to. Somebody sent me, I saw one of these memes out there, like, you don't like to wear a mask, how would you like to wear this? And it's a side view of a ventilator being shoved down your throat. So I'd like to read this one and we can end on this one. The fear of shortage of ventilators was unjustified. According to lung specialists, the invasive ventilation or intubation of COVID-19 patients, which is partially done out of fear of spreading the virus, is in fact counterproductive and damaging to the lungs. So we were supposed to flatten the curve so we could find enough ventilators. Turns out that's a bad procedure. We don't want to use ventilators.
We know this now scientifically. Ventilators and COVID-19 are a bad idea because of what the lungs are doing.
And so the virtue signaling mask folks are still using old memes about a process that is proven to be dangerous to try to shame people into doing something that has not proven to be useful.
So I feel like we need to take a step back and acknowledge that we know people are dying.
Yes, there's people dying.
There are people dying.
Yep.
It's sad that a lot of those people are people dying alone in nursing homes without their loved ones with them. I know there are places in the country of extreme population density or extreme poverty where hospitals are overwhelmed and medical staff are stressing out, and that's really hard, and we should find ways to continue to support specifically those communities and those people where the healthcare system is going to get overwhelmed in some way. I think one of the best things that we came up with a couple weeks ago was that instead of just making a one-size-fits-all rule for the breadbasket and New York City and people who make $30,000 a year and people who make $500,000 a year, we should have alternative plans and structures in place to assist different groups of people depending on what they actually need. Rather than just slap a mask on everybody, what if we had widespread testing for immunodeficiencies?
That would be useful.
Like, what if we had just went and found out, okay, here are all the people in your town who are more susceptible to viruses. Now let's all get together and make sure that they have a regular rotation of people to go get their groceries for them. I'm sorry, wearing a mask is easy. And I'm gonna say it, it's kind of a cop-out.
It's a bit of a cop-out.
It's a bit of a cop-out.
Say it. I'm gonna
Find out which of your loved ones are immunocompromised and go start a volunteer grocery shopping round for them.
Right. If
Like
you really want to care about grandma.
Make sure that your immunocompromised friends never have to go grocery shopping again. Also,
I think there's a lot of, I found out that, I think it was 1 in 4? No, it was 25% of Americans, when asked whether we go around the sun or the sun goes around us, are still saying that the sun rises and sets around us. So these are folks that we are having scientific discussions with around this case. Like, if you don't know about viruses, pathogens, all these various things that affect us, there is a perspective that viruses are our DNA upgrades. We are constantly, we're in a living world, a living environment, And these viruses are there to upgrade our systems.
Mm.
We look at them as a bad
That's
thing.
a more holistic way of
the
looking at it.
Judeo-Christian way, which is, ooh, those are demons coming to get our soul.
Illness is bad.
Illness is bad. In a more holistic approach, viruses come to upgrade our DNA. There's new things in the world. We've uncovered, we're creating havoc on the surface of the planet, which is unleashing things. And then nature is helping us find ways to cope with a changing environment.
So
And
you're
that is
somewhat equating
electromagnetic.
viruses to like almost like a vaccine, which is where you purposefully go and get a little bit sick.
Right.
So that you can handle bigger sicknesses later.
It affects your DNA.
That's what a vaccine is.
It figures out if you're going to, see, there's a Judeo-Christian model, which is nature is out to get you. And you're different than nature. And there's another model, which is you are a part of nature. And so therefore your natures and your biome is doing things to help you. Why would nature be is doing things to help you survive in the world? So we have viruses everywhere. Like this particular coronavirus is probably all over the place.
So we have a comment from a friend of the show.
Yeah.
That I'm going to read, and I want to see what you think about it.
Oh, okay.
Because we're both.
I've lost my Facebook feed. I can't.
We're both giving really strong opinions, right?
We are giving strong opinions, yes.
We're saying things really strongly based on stuff that we've learned.
Yeah.
The name of our show is Post-Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And so this friend of the show says, you guys are wild. You state that, so this is his perspective of our show.
Okay.
You state that none of this should be framed in a religious orthodoxy and then spend 20 minutes doing just that. Thanks for letting me know I'm just virtue signaling when I'm wearing my mask. So much to learn. So this friend of the show, I've never seen him wear a mask.
Right.
And he's running a business in town where people congregate together.
Without masks.
Without masks.
Right.
So to put it in context, this is why I get aggravated about people practicing their quote-unquote religion badly. So he's getting up in arms at us for having strong opinions about masks or not masks.
Well,
and he also doesn't wear one.
And for me, like the whole point of the show is not to say whether the mask is right or wrong.
No.
The point of the show is to examine the way in which we are deciding to make that choice.
And I do have strong opinions, and I based my opinions on a lot of research and input, and then when I get research and input that seems to present that a different opinion would be healthier, then I move in that direction. But the thing we're coming up against...
That makes you an elitist.
The thing that we're coming up against with this mask and no mask thing is that sometime in March, almost every American decided what they thought the right thing to do was and won't change their minds.
Well, if they're a Republican, they have to be against the mask, and if they're a Democrat, they have to be for the mask, and you cannot examine the issue because then you're out of step with
You either care about people or you care about money.
You're out of step with your tribe. You're out of step with your tribe.
And from the Republican perspective, you either care about freedom or you care about, I don't know, I'm not sure what they just call them sheeptards or something like that.
Whatever. So we're not saying, we just spent the last 15 minutes reading facts around what the latest information is on the virus. If those facts go against your worldview, then I so want to hear other facts that will enlighten me to how those facts are incorrect. That's the search. That's what science is
We're
supposed
looking
to do.
for accurate, trustworthy information. It's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
It's not easy. Everybody's tired. Everybody's scared. We've been going through a lot of horrible political stuff over the last few years. Everybody's a little worn out. Everybody on both sides knows the country is going to crap and they want to help change it and they think they know how to change it. And the civilians all latched onto this like liberty or love thing with the mask thing. And I have yet to find anybody who's willing to change their mind when presented with new data by either side. And that is unhealthy. That's the orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is refusing to change your mind because you think the rules are God. And I have strong opinions about what I think is a healthy way we could organize healthier in society. I have strong opinions. Strong opinions are not dogmas. Dogmas is when I will never change my strong opinion no matter what information is presented to me. We have another comment from forum correspondent Astrid in Sweden. She says, I think there needs to be completely new ways of working together on health over borders, instead of every nation taking care of their own.
Yes.
New structures, new ideas to avoid the overload of cluster areas, because it is not going away. We're going to live with it.
Right. Well, I found this is something that if you want to know how other people who are seemingly not politically motivated in their view of what we're doing with the coronavirus, I do have a short video. Well, it's about 8 minutes. It'll take us to the top of the hour. You want to do that now?
Is this the guy?
This is Michael Levitt. He's a Nobel laureate. He was on a panel. This is from a YouTube channel of Nobel laureates. This is not like Fox News. This isn't InfoWars. This is Nobel Peace Prize winners discussing our current. So they're smarter than I am. Fairly certain this guy's smarter than I am. He's going to discuss what he claims is a disgraceful scientific reaction to the pandemic. So this is a scientist saying that the scientific dogma. So I want to deal. Do you want to play it, or do you want I should play it?
No, you can play it. That's fine.
All right. So it's 8 minutes. I think it's worth listening to because it's a different perspective. This is not Fox perspective.
We're not saying this is God either.
This is not MSNBC perspective.
Mm-hmm.
This is not CNN
not
perspective.
Washington Post.
This also doesn't have an advertising page deciding what can be said or not said. So this is a Nobel laureate. And I'd like to, he has some frustration about how the scientific community has been dealing with the pandemic. So we're going to play this. That'll take us to the top of the hour. And then we'll come back for another topic after this. What do you think?
Some self-awareness, and then move into some self-soothing, because Lord knows we all need it.
Yeah, how not to be afraid when people fill your heads full of fearful things.
All the time.
All right, so this is the guy that I was talking about. This is Michael Levitt, Nobel laureate, talking about the disgraceful scientific
this
reaction.
music is just too much.
It's very dramatic. It's an important topipic.
Studying Corona as a data scientist, my area of speciality is time trajectories of anything. Since for 150 days already, basically working, 18 hours a day, and basically focusing on the data. I'm going to leave aside economics, politics, and media, and just simply talk about the science here. And I must say that this is the first time I've actually ever done real-time science, i.e. putting out 30 reports in as many days, full of typos, errors, backtracking, and everything. One thing that struck me once the virus moved from its China-Korea phase to the rest of the world at the beginning of March is how totally inadequate science structure is for real-time science. People are insisting on refereed reports. No one wants to share anything. The scientists are more panicked and scared of reality than anybody else. The organizations like Linda, Royal Society, the National Academy of Science have been totally silent. I am really disappointed. This has got nothing to do with the politics. As a group, scientists have failed the younger generation. Deciding what to do in this situation is really, really difficult. We cannot rely on one or two voices. There should have been a committee formed, either by the Nobel Foundation, by Linda, by the Royal Society, the National Academy, in the middle of February, when this was coming down the road, and we should have discussed this. Instead, we let economics and politics dedicate the science, and for me, the worst opposition I got was from very, very prominent scientists who were so scared that the non-scientists would break quarantine and infect them. There was total panic, and the fact is that almost all the science we were hearing, for example, from organizations like the World Health Organization, was wrong. We had Facebook censoring the World Health Organization contrary views. This has been a disgraceful situation for science, and I have nothing to do. We should have been talking with each other. Reports were released openly, shared by email, and all I got back was abuse. And you're going to see that everything I said in that first 6 weeks was actually true, and for political reasons, we as scientists let our views be corrupted. The data had very clear things to say. Nobody said to me, let me check your numbers. They all just said, stop talking like that. So I think if we had had initially just a few scientists talking to each other on Zoom, not about the opinions, but about the data. What is the population infection ratio? What is the severity? Does this thing grow exponentially? There are some very, very simple questions, and it's true that the epidemiologists were always saying that we're not epidemiologists, but the fact is that viral cases and deaths follow a time trajectory, and I think physicists and theoretical chemists who understand trajectories are way better qualified. The epidemiologists made their normal error. Epidemiologists do not, they see their job not as getting things correct, but preventing an epidemic. So therefore, if they say it's 100 times worse than it's going to be, it's okay. Their mistake was that we listened to them. They said the same thing for Ebola. They said the same thing for bird flu. No one shut down for them. We should never have listened to the epidemiologists. They have caused hundreds of billions of dollars worth of suffering and damage, mainly on the younger generation. This is going to be a tragedy it's going to make 9/11 look like a baby story. This is much, much worse. I am not against lockdown. I am against stupid lockdown without considering the full picture, i.e. not just combating a virus that is exactly as dangerous as flu, but also avoiding the economic damage that every country has caused itself except Sweden. We have really, really failed as a group. There have been smart people in Sweden, and that's about it. Germany is getting reinfected because they cut down too strongly. The level of stupidity that's been going on here has been amazing, and it just required a little bit of discussion of smart people. I'm not saying I'm right, but I would like people to conjure me on the details. Why is it not exponential? I can show you. Why is the case infection ratio this, not that? There is data for this. In other words, everything is data-driven, but people have chosen not to look at the data. Even in many places, the politics has infected the scientists. Certainly in the USA, the politics has infected the scientists. I did want to say something about risk going back further, and the Winston Center. In the middle of March, Sir David Spiegelhalter wrote a very nice Medium review equating the risk of corona with the natural risk of dying. And basically he concluded that the risk of corona, using numbers that were coming out of Imperial College, was about 1 year's worth of death. I immediately wrote back and said he was wrong. My analysis suggested that it was not 1 year's worth of death, but 1 month worth of death. I then tried to communicate this to Neil Ferguson. He ignored my emails. I got in touch with the head of the Royal Society, eventually got them to read the emails, and in the end they said, no, I was wrong, it is 1 year. The fact is, 2 months later, the excess burden of death of corona is about 3 weeks of natural death. So the fact is, as these scientists shut things down, the problem is not just with lack of communication with the public. Scientists are arrogant and refuse to listen to people not in their fields. It's a bit like a CEO of a company. Scientists are getting away scot-free for causing billions of dollars worth of damage. And this is something which cannot be allowed to happen. It's not just the World Health Organization. Ferguson wanted Sweden to lock down, got Britain to lock down, and when the numbers become normal, exactly what you would expect without lockdown, he then says, it's because of lockdown. This is terrible science. This is science which should be go on trial. Scientists cannot cause damage like this and refuse to listen. I really, really tried hard to get them at least to discuss this with me. In the end, I said something I never say, whatever. Just leave me alone, go ahead and die. And the fact is that epidemiology and modeling has been a disgrace. They have not looked at the data, they have been wrong at every turn. We're going to see that although coronavirus is a different disease, the net impact of death is going to be very similar to severe flu. And it's going to be that way without lockdown. As regards one final thing, I think a policy like Australia may seem very smart until you get second breaks and third breaks. Sweden is the only country that has done the right thing. They're heading for what they consider herd immunity. It occurs at 15%, not at 80%. Another error that epidemiologists made. Sweden is going to end up with about 600 deaths per million.
There you go.
And some catchy music to roll us out.
There you go. So that was Nobel laureate Michael Levitt slamming the epidemiological reaction to the virus and the political reaction and the economic reaction in face of the data that seems to be available for people to look at when you're looking at it beyond those perspectives. Which brings us to the top of the hour. We should probably tell people who we are, what we're doing, and come back and do the second hour to listen to KBMF LP Butte. We're going to come back and talk about self-care.
Support for KBMF comes from the located on Main Street in Uptown Butte, just across from the Pekin Noodle Parlor. The Butte Frame Shop offers framing and matting services for holidays, works of art, and more. Reach them by phone at 782-7710.
I've heard that one a bit.
Yeah.
Thank you, Butte Frame Shop. All right. So that was a bigger coronavirus update than I thought we were going to do, but
Wow.
I feel like it was a valuable conversation.
It's an
We
important
made
conversation.
people mad.
This is the thing. This is the thing that's dictating the entire planet right now. This is not just a U.S. This is not Trump versus Biden. This is a global situation.
Right.
And I think it was worth spending a few minutes on.
Well, a longtime friend of the show, Kevin Noel Olson, commented that with a chronic disease and immune issues, it's not political for him.
Right.
That makes sense to me.
That makes me really want to know where he's getting his information, because of all people that I know, he's one of those people that really needs to know what's going on.
Yeah.
To protect himself in this.
I
would like to know where he's getting his information, because I would think he would be finding information.
He'd be on top of like the most
Right.
scientific stuff for his own safety. Like, I understand that I have a sense of privilege in that I don't feel I need to know very much about COVID-19 beyond what I've already studied, because what I have studied so far has told me that I am probably not going to die from it, right?
You're not in a high risk
And I
factor,
understand that
yeah.
that's a privilege, a health privilege. We have lots of different kinds of privilege. There's gender privilege, financial privilege, racial privilege, health privilege.
Sure.
Like
technology privilege.
Educational privilege.
Yeah.
So I understand I'm working from a place of health privilege. I care about this conversation because I want there to be more effective social structures in place so that people like our friend Kevin can have a full and rich life and also be safe.
Yes.
And healthy.
Agreed.
Such as community volunteer grocery shopping services where Kevin isn't breaking his bank paying for a shopper service so he can get safe groceries.
Right. So that was our coronavirus update. Thanks for sticking through it with us, folks.
Astrid says from Sweden, it might be true what the Nobel laureate guy was saying. We are now on something around 5,000 deaths and are almost down. It scrolled down. So she says 6,000 sounds about right for his estimate.
They're getting to neutral. They're getting to where they didn't do lockdown. They're doing social distancing and sanitary practices, and they've almost leveled out. And they seem to think that they're getting herd immunity. That they've let it run its course to the point. And like I said, the largest group hit are elders with immune problems.
Yeah.
And so.
And people like our friend Kirk, who has scarred upper lungs and asthma.
Right.
That's somebody that needs to be more careful.
Right.
And really find out what's really going on.
So that was, we spent a little more time on that. That's why I think it's, okay, so now we're dealing
But
with.
that does have to do with self-awareness and self-care.
It has a lot to do with it. I went down we had a friend of the show suggest she said that she deals with some of her stress by, this is in private messages in the course of the week, said that she deals with some of her stress by watching Eckhart Tolle videos.
Ooh.
And
Eckhart Tolle.
Eckhart Tolle. Well, I'm not going to speak for him. I'm going to find his bio. But Eckhart Tolle is I guess you could call him a philosopher. He's one of those guys that he wrote a number of books, and he deals with the present moment. That's his main topic. which I guess would be now. He deals
The
with
present.
now a lot.
Here's the first thought that comes up for me about presence. Two thoughts. One is this quote from Kung Fu Panda, where the wise old turtle kung fu master tells the panda guy, I saw this a really long time ago, but he was like, tomorrow is a mystery, the past is history, and today is a gift. That is why we call it present. I'm like, oh, I love it. And then the other thought that comes up for me is just something that's really become very clear to me in my own struggles with my anxieties, which is about the future, and trauma, which is about the past, is that the only thing that ever really exists is right now. The future never arrives. Tomorrow never comes. You're never living in tomorrow. You're only ever living in today right now. And the past only exists because we carry it around in our memories by choice.
Right.
So that can be a lovely thing that you're carrying around in your memories, or a horrible thing that you're choosing to carry around in your memories. And some of that stuff is important because you need to learn from history, or else you're doomed to repeat it, etc.
So Eckhart Tolle, German guy, lives in Canada. Wikipedia describes him as a spiritual teacher and best-selling author. The titles of his books, The Power of Now, Stillness Speaks, Practicing the Power of Now. He deals a lot with how to appreciate the moment, that the future is a fiction, that your life is the present moment, and when you're thinking about the future, you're not living.
You're not in your actual life.
Right.
Ooh, you're not living. If you are thinking about the future, you're not living.
You're not living. You're in a fantasy about something that won't ever come.
Castle on a cloud.
Yeah, it won't ever come.
Doesn't ever come.
The future it doesn't show up.
Mm.
You only have now, and you've only ever had now, and will only ever have now. And so how you're dealing with now is your life. If you're spending the now thinking about the past or the future, you're not living your life.
Mm-hmm.
You're in some sort of delay pattern.
Like you're in your own mental matrix. That's not where you actually are, or the moment you're actually in.
One of the problems of this virus is it attacks the immune system. Immune system is really susceptible to stresses. Mm-hmm. So if you are stressed, if you are fearful, if you have anxiety,
you might get acne.
You compromise yourself with fear.
Yes.
The nature of this virus and the inability to find good, accurate scientific information to base your actions on has driven up stress and anxiety for people, which ironically has made them more susceptible to the virus.
Because we've been divorced from, our minds and our bodies have been disconnected in really heinous ways over the last couple hundred years. And we forget that how our mind is doing affects how our body is doing. And if your mind is stressed and anxious and angry and depressed, it's going to affect your physical well-being and vice versa.
Well, Eckhart Tolle said it best when he said, if danger arises in the present moment, there may be an emotion. There may even be pain. But that's a challenge, not a problem. Mm. For a problem to exist, you need time and repetitive mind activity.
One more time.
Yes, if danger arises in the present moment, there may be an emotion. There may even be pain, but that's a challenge, not a problem. For a problem to exist, you need time and repetitive mind activity. So Eckhart Tolle deals a lot with people struggling with their inability to be present. I watched a number of his videos, people saying, I've read your books, I've done your meditations, and me thinking about not thinking causes me to think too much. We get into these loops because we're not accustomed to being present. We're not accustomed to being in the moment. Often when we're in a dialogue with someone, we're waiting for them to shut up because we have a preconceived notion of the thing we're going to say to them because we know the topic and we already know how we feel. We're not listening to what they're saying. We're not listening to what the moment is dictating.
You're listening to respond.
You're listening to respond. You're not listening to be there at that moment. So I thought in terms of self-care, I know you've done some research and you want to talk about some things. I would like to throw out some of my favorite people. Self-care. Like Eckhart Tolle is one of those guys that I keep running across in my adult life, but I've never really watched his videos until yesterday. And I think that's a wonderful meditation. To watch his stuff and to see him keep massaging the problem that we have with overthinking our lives and creating stress for ourselves, which then generate the problems, versus being present and understanding what's going on in the present moment. We don't ever get to there.
You had some realizations about yourself last week about presence.
Right. There's Eckhart Tolle is one of those guys. We can get to that in a second.
Okay.
I really like Terence McKenna.
Yeah.
Terence McKenna sort of zooms out and uses a different model of the universe. I like all his books. I like all his videos. Like except for the ones with the acid heads, but way too much sitar music behind him.
Special music. Yeah.
And I think Eckhart Tolle shares a big Venn diagram overlap with Alan Watts.
Oh yeah, that was the other thing that our anonymous friend of the show suggested was Alan Watts videos.
Alan Watts is great.
He's so soothing.
Both Tolle and Watts are Westerners. Tolle is German, but they're Westerners that have taken the Buddhist teachings and interpreted them for the Western mind versus translating them. Translating them is just tit for tat. Interpreting them is taking that, really understanding that experience
in context,
translating it to the Western experience, which is often using different models to deal with reality. So those folks are, if you're ever feeling stressed or out of control, all those guys, in my opinion, are really wonderful to help pull the curtain back a little bit. And
get some perspective outside of the moment.
Perspective where I get things get too close to my eyeballs, and I forget that there's something beyond that.
Josie in our Facebook comments suggests Byron Katie's The Work. Thank you so much for that suggestion.
Yeah, we're looking for other suggestions of folks on how they get themselves out of panic spirals.
Right.
I feel like our nation at large, and especially so much of my Facebook friends group, which is why I backed off of Facebook, there is a panic spiral going on. There's a lack of authority.
I just started feeling ill every time I would look through my Facebook trying to talk to people.
I definitely started feeling dumber every time I got on Facebook. There's a lot of panic and there's a lot of fear. And I think I have things where I can get myself out of that. And I think if you have things where you can get yourself out of that, please share them in the comments.
Definitely. It really definitely, you know, are we talking acute anxiety, chronic anxiety? Chronic is my knees are shot because I rode horses a lot when I was growing in my teens. Acute is my knees are shot because I got in a car accident last week.
Right.
So you can have anxiety that just goes on and on and on, and you can have acute anxiety that is suddenly I am dealing with a ton of anxiety because of something that just happened. Maybe you encounter somebody who abused you unexpectedly in the grocery store. Sudden attack of anxiety. So there are ways to self-soothe for a acute anxiety experience, such as standing very still, feeling your feet on the ground, moving up and feeling your ankles stacked on your feet, feeling your knees connected down your bones to your ankles, onto your feet, onto the ground, and working your way slowly up your whole body and becoming present with your body and focusing on your breathing. And you breathe in for count of 4 and you breathe out for count of 4. And that is something that you can immediately do to self-soothe in an instance of chronic anxiety or acute anxiety or acute trauma, sudden onrush of I need to take care of myself. Self-soothing is something that you do as a distraction and as a technique to calm yourself down. It is not a long-term solution.
Binging on Netflix?
Binging on Netflix might be something you do if an abusive ex starts texting you out of the blue and you just need to be distracted.
Tune out for a while. Because if I think about the situation, it's going to bring it all back.
And I'll get sick. I'll start, wine drinking and calling all my friends.
Right.
And so self-care is something that you do long-term, proactively to enable yourself to take care of yourself in the future. And I shared a link in our in our Facebook feed that I'm going to share one more time. It's it's easy to find these comics online just by looking up self-care versus self-soothing. And the first article that comes up is the unspoken complexity of self-care. And this lady, Deanna Zant, did a really, really great breakdown of self-soothing and self-care. And so this is the short little bit that she said. Self-care is thrown around a lot as a magic bullet to solve all of your problems. If you'd only take a second to treat yourself, you'd be fine. But what does self-care really mean? First, I think there's a difference between self-care and self-soothing. Self-soothing might look something like this, for example, TV binging, a treat snack, bubble bath, going for a walk, exercising, taking time off from responsibilities. These are all delightful things. Self-soothing is incredibly important to our well-being. Sometimes, though, these activities may not actually stabilize you or create opportunities for you to move forward. They're just an in-the-moment solution, like a Band-Aid. That's where self-care can come in. Self-care is activities that help you find meaning and that support your growth and groundedness ongoingly, such as regular therapy, regular naps, regular quality food, taking care of your finances so they don't suddenly stress you out, making sure that you're getting the appropriate medical care, doing yoga, setting boundaries with people in your life, saying yes when you mean it and no when you mean it. Do you feel the difference between soothing and care? Still, it takes a lot to even be able to do self-care because the systems and cultural norms in which we currently live can feel impossible to navigate on our own. That's why it's important to move on to community care and structural care. Community care is workarounds for systems that don't inherently support care. Right now in the US, we don't really have systems that support care. In Sweden, they have more systems. In Norway, they have more systems that support ongoing preventative care for groundedness and growth. But community care are ways of supplementing those systems that aren't caring for you, such as worker-owned co-ops where everybody gets together and shares the internet and shares the rent for a space so that they can all have a space to do work when they need it. Intimate relationships beyond the traditional romantic couples norm. Free cycling, taking care of each other's kids in trade, those sorts of things. Co-housing. Taking one step further back, it is also important to recognize workarounds and harm reduction in the moment are only one part of the solution. We also need to fundamentally overhaul or tear down and rebuild entirely the systems in which we live so that we can be further enabled to work on other kinds of care we need, which leads us to the last one in this lady's list, structural care. Systems that support community care, self-care, and self-soothing. So wouldn't it be nice if the whole planet was a top-down self-care engine, such as comprehensive universal health care, environmental defense and renewal, child and elder care for everyone, a living wage so that you can make enough in one job to take care of yourself and your family, racial and gender equality and justice and liberation, effective public transportation, paid family leave. I'll share that link in our Facebook feed for people again.
I was going to share something, but I haven't found a good source. I did look up quickly something that I've been fascinated with in the last few weeks, which is the idea of toxic positivity.
Oh, that sounds like an oxymoron.
Right? Live Life Love says you just got to think positive things all the time. Just put your vision board out there and just think good things, and good things will come to you. And there's something to that. But I think there's a version, which is
like
called
a bastardized version.
Toxic positivity or toxic optimism. The phrase toxic positivity is the culture of portraying yourself as being happy no matter what. You're basically switched off to anything which might be viewed as negative. It's also the idea of encouraging people to always see the bright side and not open up about anything bad.
So this is something that people do that they think is them being strong and rising above.
It's fake it till you make it.
Right.
Which has a place.
Right.
I'm down with faking it till you make it.
Sometimes you do have to do that.
But I think when you fake it till you make it, there's a toxic aspect to that. When you get out of, there's another definition of this, which was what is toxic optimism? While hoping involves having faith that we will get positive results, the toxic optimism means having them, taking them for granted. This kind of optimism develops when we let our emotions manipulated statistics to the point where our desire for something to happen far exceeds the actual outcomes that do happen. So, taking care of yourself, we started off with Eckhart Tolle.
Right.
There's one phrase that in his stuff, even though he looks like he looks like something out of The Office, like some guy who just might have.
He has like a Mr. Rogers sweater.
Yeah, he looks like he just might be sitting in a cubicle somewhere with his lifelong career. He throws out these very much Zen koans very periodically. There's one that I was going to read. People, where'd it go now? What a liberation to realize that the voice in my head is not who I am.
Whoa.
Well, who am I then?
Who is the voice in your head then?
The one who sees that.
Mm.
That's deep.
Like deep self-observation and awareness.
We often identify with the voice in our head. Often the voice in our head is our culture.
Oh gosh, I know so many things that pop into my head that are not truly Ainsley.
Eckhart Tolle said that if you live in one culture for the first 20 years of your life, you become conditioned without knowing it. So if we raised in the same place and we have the same culture, even if we don't agree with our culture, and even if we're opposed to our culture, we're still calculating in opposition to, not from of ourself. So the idea of getting to the point where you realize that your thoughts are not necessarily you, when you can recognize that those are not my thoughts, the one that recognizes that those thoughts are not you, is you.
Right.
And that's a big leap, and that's not something you get to easily for a lot of people.
Okay.
So I think it can be relieving to realize that the chatter in your head is not necessarily, as Terence McKenna says, culture is not your friend. We often get prescribed distractions, prescribed fights, prescribed battles that we have to take sides on, and we exhaust ourselves fighting for a cause that isn't necessarily healthy for us, or may not even be the cause that we're necessarily in ourselves interested in, but we do it to be a part of our culture, which may not have our best interest in mind.
Right.
I'll start going in circles if you want.
No, I think it's a complex issue. I think, like I said, I think it takes zooming out and zooming in. It takes backwards and forwards and up and down and in and out and round and round and self-awareness and self-care. You can't have, Don Andrews visited us this afternoon.
Yes.
And he said a really great thing, something about the Buddhist circle of awareness, which I'm trying to find because I didn't write it down fast enough. But it was like, you can't have self-care without self-awareness. So there's the moment where you have a feeling. And in order to soothe yourself about the anger that you're having or the sadness that you're having, you have to come to a place of observance. You have to become aware, I am angry, in order to begin enacting solutions. And that you cannot have understanding of why you are angry and enact solutions unless you have awareness. I think along the self-awareness vein, I had a really funny conversation with one of our guests, our Airbnb guests a long time ago, who was a traveling network builder, and he was at our house for a week, so we got pretty friendly. And he hadn't gotten a haircut in months. He had long, shaggy hair, and I thought it looked great, but he felt like as a professional working in the computer field, he should get a haircut. He was just like, I just hate them. I just hate haircuts. And I, made a joke like, oh, did somebody snip your ear when you were a child? Because in my mind, obviously he would either know that happened or know that that's not why he hates haircuts, Right. And he was like, oh my God.
Yes.
Somebody did, with clippers. They were clipping and they just clipped the whole top curve of my ear right off when I was 7. And he just had this, he had never thought of, he's like 40. He never wondered why he hated haircuts.
And then you said maybe somebody clipped your ear and it all came together.
Yeah.
And he spent his entire life
just thinking he hates haircuts.
not knowing why he hated haircuts.
Yeah. And
And
it
just
really,
not thinking about why he hated haircuts.
Not wondering.
Just having an ongoing resistance to haircuts.
I just don't like haircuts.
You can call that trauma.
That's fascinating, right? And it really brought into my awareness this concept that I think about a lot these days as I work on recovering from my own religious trauma from evangelicalism, which is that bad things don't happen for no reason.
Mm.
Bad things don't happen for no reason.
That would be a karmic perspective, I think.
You don't just hate haircuts because you were born hating haircuts. When you're born, you don't hate anything. When you're born, you don't hate anything.
You hate it when mommy doesn't show up at dinner.
Yeah, but that's not what you're born with.
Right.
You learn to be mad if you do not get fed when you need to be fed.
Yeah.
However, if you are in a sort of household that's more holistic, where your mother is carrying you for the first year of your life after birth, she's aware when you're hungry.
Elitist.
And prioritizes your care so that you don't begin to develop anxieties in the first year of life by worrying that you won't be able to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So there are conversations that can be had around self-awareness, but what came up for me when I realized that this guy just thought he hated haircuts was this pervasive idea in the US that sometimes bad things just happen for no reason.
Well,
sometimes people are just horrible people. And it's like, no, people are horrible people because something horrible happened to them.
That's where the whole devil myth comes in really handy. You can just blame bad things on some outside agent.
Right. Somebody just abused me, they were just a bad person, I can just hate them. And I'm like, sorry, actually, every abuser is someone who has been abused.
Eckhart Tolle says, I don't believe in an outside agent that creates the world, then walks away. But I feel very strongly there is an intelligence at work in every flower, in every blade of grass, in every cell in my body. And it is that intelligence that, I wouldn't say created the universe, it is creating the universe. It's an ongoing process. Eckhart Tolle is one of those guys that I think you could put him right up on the edge of Christian mysticism. He is not opposed to the Christian paradigm. He is not opposed to religious paradigms. He seems to be so at ease with himself that he can find those paradigms useful and help people who like being in the Christian paradigm and helping them find a way to be there more at ease in that place rather than having to defend the indefensible.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of aspects to modern commercial Christianity, modern evangelical Christianity that I don't feel like go along with the core of what that practice was supposed to be. And so
you think that there's a way of being Christ-like that people aren't really doing these days.
Right. I think people get loyal to the brand and then recognize cognitive gaps, like these biases that are like, I don't agree with that. Yeah, my church doesn't like gay people, but I like gay people, but I can't leave my church.
I can't like gay people.
So it
because
starts to create problems. So he's one of those guys that manages to meet people where you are and say it's not about God or not God or the devil. It's about you and how you're dealing with the world. It's not what happens. This is a Dark City 8 quote. It's not what happens, but it's how you deal with what happens.
I have some quotes to share from our viewers this afternoon who are inputting some self-care and self-awareness things.
I really appreciate when people join in the show. What do we have?
I love it. Kevin Noel Olson says, what a man takes in by contemplation, he pours out in love. And that's from Meister Eckhart.
Meister Eckhart, yeah.
And then he also shared, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Soren Kierkegaard.
That's very Eckhart Tolle. In essence, yeah, they're saying the same thing.
And then Kirk Jones shared, life is a force which can be acted upon or applied to. Kirk Jones.
Right on, Kirk Jones.
Between him and Kevin, it made me think about the resistance is futile. And that suffering is resisting the way things are. Pain happens.
Right.
But like the story of the Buddhist monk who carries a complaining beggar over a stream and sets him down free of charge. And then a mile down the path, his companion is like, I just still can't understand why you helped that guy. He was being so rude. And the Buddhist monk says, I set him down a long time ago, but I can see you are still carrying him.
Right.
That the companion was resisting
what had happened.
Which is suffering.
That's suffering.
Suffering is resisting what is happening.
Right. I got that concept delivered to me by Alan Watts in one of his books, where he said, pain is inherent. You learn to walk, you're going to stub your toe. Belly aching over the stubbed toe is suffering, and that is not required.
Right.
When we suffer things, we resist what must be.
Yeah.
And that takes us out of the moment. So it made me really aware of my language. In this culture, we mix up pain and suffering. We often say, "Oh, you're pain and suffering," as if suffering must come with pain.
As if you have to suffer to live.
No, suffering is your choice. Pain is not necessarily your choice, but suffering is.
I think about all the stories that I heard. The heroes that I was given growing up were mostly Christian martyrs.
Okay.
People throughout history who were imprisoned for horribly long times, or tortured to try to get them to denounce the faith because of Romans or whatever. So the heroes I was given was these people who were so convicted of the truth of what they were believing in that in the face of great pain or isolation or torture, they did not suffer.
Right.
Because it was only bringing them closer to heaven.
In your mythology growing up.
Yeah, I mean, these are actual people who were murdered in history, but the stories that I was told about them were from the perspective that they were Christians, and that they were imprisoned for years, but they did not suffer the imprisonment.
Yeah, that's the thing.
They found a way to be present with their imprisonment. Who was that magician that Zoe shared with us?
Oh, there was one of the guys from
the something four.
The West Memphis 3.
Yeah.
So he's a kid who was pretty much framed for a murder, spent time in prison, and in prison he became like a Zen monk.
Right. He was not suffering his imprisonment.
He realized that he found opportunities in that event to better himself. So he doesn't regret having gone to prison because he became the person he is. It's the way I feel about, we don't always have the best childhoods. And you can live the rest of your life suffering what happened to you as a child. Or you can use that as a jumping off point to get present. It's an obstacle to overcome, right? Or an opportunity to
be with your anger.
Be with your anger. How to deal with
your sadness.
These are the lessons that we learn, right?
Yeah.
So we are not real good as a culture. We've become a push button culture. We think we can just go buy a thing to solve our problem.
That's self-soothing, which is I feel bad, so I need to stop it. Self-care is how do I take care of myself to lessen the suffering. Brad Moore in Missouri tuned in. He says, we can learn a lot from the Swedish penal system. Oh, Astrid must be having such a great day. Everybody's saying such nice things about Sweden. The Swedish penal system, because they focus on rehabilitation as opposed to punishment, and don't have for-profit prisons, which is disgusting and a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
In recent years, they have drastically reduced the number of prisoners incarcerated, and in their recidivism, like going back to prison.
Yeah, recidivism is the rate at which people go back after they've been in.
So Sweden's rate is only like 40%, which is way lower than the US.
Yes.
Of people who've been to prison go back to prison at only a rate of 40%.
It depends if it's a reform system or a punitive system.
And then
we have a punitive system.
We do. We have it's unfortunately very bad Christianity.
Yes.
It's like poor quality Christianity.
And that's why we get away with it.
Yeah. Kirk says, good and bad are relative terms, and Astrid replied, I was just thinking of good and bad. I come from a culture where bad or evil doesn't really exist. We start from good, and then there is broken. This is what my conversations about the U.S. revolve around so much, is that we do think there is good and bad, as in some people are just bad, and that's why we need police, and that's why we need the prisons. Because some people are just going to do bad things, and we need Christianity to just save us from doing what we're naturally going to do, which is naturally bad.
I often like to talk about the word sin in our culture. Sin in the Christian sense is a bad thing. You've done a bad thing.
Right.
Where the etymological
wrong thing.
The etymological roots of that word is the sin is the gap between what you aimed for with the arrow and where the arrow landed. So the sin was how far off the mark you were. So sin is not doing an evil, bad, destructive, rebellious thing. Sin is missing the mark of an ideal situation.
A mistake or a broken thing.
Right. And sometimes it requires practice to reduce the sin. So in our culture, the thing is best not sin.
Just
don't ever learn how to hit the mark.
Right. Only do things that you think you won't mess up.
Yeah, that's toxic, in my opinion.
Kevin Knowlson says, when justice is traded on the stock market and produced in courts, it is not just.
Preach.
Yeah. Wow, okay. So for the benefit of our radio listeners, I will share something that was shared with me anonymously through Instagram, which is a really great resource that I have gotten more involved in ways I didn't realize was possible over the last several months. I've spent the last year since Father's Day 2019 trying to get in touch with my parents in a more healthy and honest way, and have been meeting with a lot of resistance for various reasons. And in order to support myself in trying to create a new relationship with them, I started following various hashtags on Instagram, where you can follow a hashtag for religious trauma. You can follow a hashtag for, in my specific case, ex-evangelical, which is where people who have gotten out of this very totalitarian, judgment-based version of Christianity,
Unorthodoxy,
can support themselves in either not feeling badly about leaving religion behind, or in finding an expression of being a follower of Jesus that they don't think is toxic.
Right.
So I follow hashtag ex-evangelical. I also follow hashtag narcissism, which gives me posts from people who have dealt with narcissists in their life or narcissistic behaviors, which is often someone who is so confident in themselves and their being right that they need to keep you in a particular role in their life, and are constantly telling you that your perspective of reality is wrong, so gaslighting. And I experienced a lot of that growing up, but I wouldn't probably call my mother narcissistic, because I think what she was doing was backed up by her version of God. I don't think she's naturally a narcissistic person. I think she was behaving towards us children in these sorts of gaslighting and controlling ways because that's what her version of God told her to do. And so I follow that, and that enables me to understand, to be aware of what I experienced and understand how it made me feel, and understand what pathways may or may not be available for communication in the future. And what my friend shared with me on Instagram is the holistic psychologist. Dr. Nicole LaPera, I teach you to heal and consciously create a new version of yourself. Here's another hashtag you can follow, hashtag self-healers. There are a lot of resources available to us in the modern age with the internet.
Unprecedented.
YouTube videos, blogs, online books, so many resources out there where you can find support to heal yourself, become aware of yourself, soothe yourself, care for yourself, and that's what this, she makes a lot of, so her Instagram feed is full of this information, signs you are healing from your past, signs you are healing your ego, signs that you are becoming your authentic self, questions to begin understanding your inner child, the various stages of spiritual awakening. These are all topics that can lead to becoming aware of yourself. I think even just keeping the childlike question why close in your consciousness all the time, and anytime something comes up for you, whether it's a feeling of anger or a strong opinion about something, ask yourself why. Why do I think that such and such should always be this way? And chances are, if you persist with the why, you will find yourself traveling back in time to earlier parts of your life where these belief systems were put in place, where you suddenly hate all such and such because of something bad that happened to you when you were 5 or 6. And so keeping this childlike why close to you, I think is just one of the easiest things. If you want to have just one takeaway of like, how can I become more self-aware? Ask yourself why. Ask yourself, why do you have this feeling? Instead of just feeling sad and then jumping right to anger to defend yourself because feeling sad is yucky, ask yourself why you're sad. And if you have a strong opinion, or you blurt something out, or you're like, oh, I just hate haircuts, or oh, I just can't go in there, you know, like, don't leave yourself at just.
Right.
You know?
Right. We had a comment from Astrid.
Oh, yeah?
She said, Ainsley, about Christian role models. Didn't they give you St. Bridget or Haliga Brigida? She didn't suffer. She hated the rich and manipulative men that made the poor suffer and was absolutely fierce. Her speeches to the noble people from the 13th century need to be censored for modern media.
I never heard of St. Bridget.
No. Irish. She was Irish.
No, there were no women heroes that were not being heroic by being submissive. All of our women heroes were heroically submissive to pain and suffering.
Yeah, the Catholic and the evangelical are two different Christian models, absolutely. So we're coming up on 20 minutes to the end of the show.
Yeah.
You mentioned some topics into the show. Are there any topics that we need to do updates on before, as promised, before we close out the show?
Well, I think we, oh, she wants you to know that St. Bridget is Swedish. Excuse me?
They said, oh, well, I looked up St. Bridget, they said Irish. So
There's
it might be a different St. Bridget.
There's a different, that's why she specified that specific Bridget.
Oh, okay, very good.
I like that Buddhist Circle of Awareness. I wish I had had time to pull that up and share that with people. I think we've said some good things, and I'm happy to move on to doing a bit of a breakdown of how did we get here with the current Black Lives Matter movement. You had a great conversation with your mom this week, an unexpected phone conversation.
Sure.
Where rather than just getting mad at each other on Facebook, she asked you some questions on the phone, and then listened to you answer them as to why the rioting and looting, and why the statues tearing down, and why the angriness. And we can leave your mom's perspective on the whole thing out of the question, but yes. I think you brought up 4 really great basic things people can go look into if they actually are wondering why people are angry, because part of self-awareness is anger is a warning signal. It's a red alert that there's something wrong. There's something wrong.
We don't know how to be angry in this country well, generally speaking. I see a lot of friends of mine that are afraid of their anger. They
think anger is bad.
They feel like they have anger issues and that the issue is the anger. I had similar struggles growing up in my family. There was no real healthy anger in my family. It was only seething resentment or violent rage. There was no healthy anger. And when I came to coming to terms with my own anger, is that anger is an emotion that comes about to alert you to something in your environment that needs to be paid attention to.
Maybe it's inside of yourself, and maybe it's actually in your literal environment.
Right. So in your bioterrain or in your larger terrain, for sure. So the idea that anger is there to show you something.
Anger doesn't just happen for no reason. It happens because something is wrong.
I started looking at anger as a guard dog. So the dog barks, and then you're like, you don't just send the dog off to go attack what it's barking at. You wait and you see. You look, what is the dog barking
at? The dog is letting me know about something.
Is this something the dog should be barking at?
You also don't just tell the dog, be quiet, because that's his job.
And that's what people do with their anger. They just tell their anger to be quiet instead of saying, why is the dog barking? Why am I angry? So for myself, I got over my resistance to being angry because I realized there is a difference between just blind rage and being righteously angry.
And what you do after that anger happens.
And what I try to advise people who are struggling with that is you pay attention to the fact that you're angry. Try to understand what the anger is, but you don't act out of the anger. That's rage. That's something else. You don't act out of the anger. You can let anger inform your actions, but you yourself have to actually take actions that is not fueled by the anger. So we're not really healthy. Otherwise, if we had healthy angry, we would be out punching people in the kidneys in the Senate and the Congress right now.
Yeah. We'd be like, there's something wrong in our environment, and now we're going to go change it.
We don't have healthy anger, otherwise our system wouldn't be so badly broken. If we were more angry and righteously outraged, we wouldn't have the problems that we're having. So,
and so
part
when
of
you
what we're-
see people being angry,
Right.
understand that they are angry because something is wrong. Whether they're a child who the wrong thing is they wanted to wear mismatched clothing to church,
Right.
or an adult where the wrong thing is they sense their partner is cheating on them, anger, don't you be like, oh, anger means look over here, there's something wrong. So there are a lot of people in the country right now who are very angry, and there are reasons that they're angry. We can go into specific little details and show you 375 videos of police brutality that happened in the last 48 hours in the US, or we can talk about these big four structural things briefly over the last 10 minutes of our show, which are the 13th Amendment, which switched enslavement from literal slaves on plantations to enslaved prison labor for free in for-profit prisons in the US.
You can be enslaved if you're a criminal.
You can be forced to work for free or nothing if you've committed a crime.
If you've committed a crime.
The affordable housing, which was supposed to give World War II veterans the ability to start a new life in the country in trade for the work that they've done for the US, which heavily discriminated against and excluded anybody of color.
Yes.
So generational wealth and generational poverty began in large part at that point when white veterans were able to have a house and start a family and black veterans were homeless.
Yes.
And then we had our drug war, which began in part because of
Nixon's re-election campaign, or election campaign,
Mhm.
yes, where Ehrlichman decided that if he criminalized,
in order to get the right people voting,
if he criminalized the radical left, anti-war radical left, and black people by finding things that they did that were not crimes,
then you would get them out of the voting and out of the social involvement.
and well, it also scared white people who were afraid of the changing culture, the radical left and the Black Panthers and women's rights. There's a lot of change that scared white people were afraid of. It was designed to appeal to scared white middle class people
Who had no encounters with people of color other than being afraid people of color were going to come and attack them.
Yes. So the criminalization of marijuana, heroin, cocaine, all that business was done with a racial motivation, so admitted by the architect of that.
Get more black people and Mexicans in prison.
And just not to make it a Republican issue, the rise of the neoliberal political arm, which is today we consider Democrats, with Bill Clinton's policy around getting tough on crime, Hillary Clinton's famous quote around the super predators, and Joe Biden and his crew with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton privatizing prisons basically created a slave class disproportionately of black people.
As in, our prisons
Our
are
prisons
full and
are slave
yeah,
plantations.
for profit.
For profit. Often people who are in there for poverty reasons,
Because they couldn't pay a parking ticket.
because they couldn't pay a parking ticket, or for doing something that was not criminal, but
Crime
was a
is
crime.
causing harm.
Crime is supposed to be causing harm. If you're smoking marijuana, you're not committing a crime.
If you're drinking alcohol, you're not committing
You're not
crime.
committing
You
a
might
crime.
drink alcohol and then speed.
If you drink alcohol and bludgeon somebody, that's a crime.
Yeah, but you drinking alcohol is not a crime.
Right. So
However, you smoking marijuana is a crime.
they somehow made something that was not a criminal act a crime and criminalized a class of people, and now they are angry.
Those people.
And they're showing their anger. And my mom is confused about why they're angry, because
She doesn't know about the historic structural problems.
they're just being treated the way they should be, in her opinion.
Unfortunately, black people are just more.
They're just more
it's
criminal.
genetically.
Yeah, she said it was genetic.
Yeah.
Now that's
An
a belief
unfortunate belief system.
That's an unfortunate belief system that is not uncommon among folks in this country. If you took that belief system, and the one thing that I did not say to my mom, because I chose to have a conversation with her and not make her hang up on me, is I'm like, you're afraid of our failing, broken system because of what the black people are doing. Who's running the system?
Isn't it been
Who's
white
been-
people running the system for a
Who's
long
been
time?
managing the broken system? Who's managing the system that is collapsing? It's not because black people, the system that has been run by white people is being collapsed by white people. And there are effects of that, which is people no longer wanting to be turned into a slave caste is a big part of the problem. So, yes.
And then our fourth.
What's the fourth?
Is Reagan emptying the mental institutions and defunding mental health care.
So, in my opinion, the last human president we had was Jimmy Carter. Whether you agree with his policies or not, he was one of the last guys that looked into the camera and talked to the American people as an American person. And he put together a very comprehensive mental health plan to take care of mental health issues in our country. And a lot of the mental health issues were dealing with people from our various wars that were dealing with traumas and dealing with PTSD. So he put together a very comprehensive mental health plan that was immediately scrapped by Reagan, which caused us to release people who were in care into the wilds of our streets, which mushroomed our homeless population and also caused a lot of criminal issues. So now we had to start funding the police to deal with our lack in mental health. We had to start up more funding for the police to deal with our social issues, which was about housing for people who needed a leg up. So there was that's the four parts. Like, this system didn't come out of nowhere. Black people are not protesting because they're angry at white people. Black people are protesting because of a systemic problem that they are saying no more. They're saying no more. We know enough. If you watch the movie, The 13th, you see the creating and the massaging of the system that has disempowered disproportionately poor people and mostly black people. So it's not a mystery now. It was a conspiracy theory in the 90s when you talked about this. It's not a conspiracy theory.
We know these things.
It is a conspiracy that happened and is happening now. It is a conspiracy to criminalize the
not being white.
Not being white.
And often not being wealthy.
And you can look at the architecture of that conspiracy. It's in our history books. So it's not a mystery anymore. If you don't understand why black people are angry, you could.
You could know.
You could understand why they're angry.
It's quite possible that you don't understand why people of color are angry because you don't know what they have experienced.
Or you have confirmation bias and you're only looking for things to support old confirmation off of a culture that gave you bad information.
Which you don't have to have judgment about. A very important part of self-awareness is having non-judgment over yourself. So in your quest to become more self-aware, and you ask yourself why more often. Why do I think that? Why do I like that piece of information? Why am I following this person and not that person? Why did that make me angry? The more you ask why, the more you're going to uncover reasons, and the knee-jerk reaction is going to be to have a judgment around that reason. Oh, I don't like that that's the reason. That has to do with my dad and I hate my dad. Or I don't like that that's the reason because that's embarrassing. Or I don't like that that's the reason because that makes me seem weak. You can have non-judgment around the reasons why you have strong opinions and strong beliefs. And so if you want to know
what's going
why
on,
people are angry,
but
you feel resistance, you don't have to have judgment that it's an animal instinct to want to know your environment and how to be safe in your environment. It makes sense in your hind animal brain that you would not want to find out you've been wrong this whole time.
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
But you don't have to have judgment about yourself about it.
Can be embarrassing.
You can just say, I, in my higher brain, or my frontal lobe, or my inner self, or my true self, or my better self, however you want to think about it, want to know the truth. Even if that means that I was wrong. And that's okay. And you can still be safe.
Kevin Noah Olson shared a testimony, so it's a video, I guess, or a page.
YouTube video.
Testimony of Paul Robeson before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. His testimony against the accusations of him being a communist. I imagine that is in relation to what we're talking about today. I'm not going to be able to get to it on the show.
He said Robeson attended a peace forum with Olaf Stapleton in 1950. Both had significant issues in attending as their respective governments didn't like the event and that communist reps attended. And then the U.S. was like, yeah, you're a commie.
Right.
And, yeah, so.
So this is the thing I'm gonna have to get to after the show. Thanks for the link. I'll be checking it out.
Thanks for sharing
after
that
the show.
with our friends.
We've only got 5 minutes before the Sunday Smackdown occurs on America's Most Radio.
Mm-hmm.
Dan and Patty in at 6 o'clock.
It's true.
To do their breakdown of what.
A whole new perspective.
It's another perspective.
A whole new perspective. So
there's some Venn diagram crossover that's in line with ours.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice that we get to do this.
Kevin was hoping for an update on CHOP. We've been involved in a bunch of other local stuff this week and haven't been keeping an eye on the Twitter sphere, but I do get updates from Omari Salisbury, which is twitter.com/
and Facebook.
OMARISAL. Omari Sal. You can find him on Twitter, on Facebook, Omari Salisbury. He is a civilian reporter on the ground.
From the neighborhood. In
the neighborhood, doing live videos, interviews, attending the meetings with the mayors, filing affidavits, pulling all the information forward, and sharing it online so that you can, that's been one of our best resources for what's going on minute to minute.
One of the reasons for my trip to the Capitol Hill Occupy protest was to find good sources, and Omari was the guy who seems to have the largest amount of in-person local perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find him on Twitter and on Facebook.
Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in this afternoon. We really appreciate you guys participating in the conversation. That's what Post-Orthodoxy is all about. I'm living in
We'll be back next week, and I would like to. Next week, I want to look at what's going on right now with coronavirus, why we are not getting good information, and how it played out with the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and the information problems that we had then that caused a lot of harm, and a lot of fear, and a lot of anxiety that even now still goes on. But there are some Orthodox scientists that have their perspective, and some scientists you might call post-Orthodox about what happened with the HIV/AIDS.
That's going to be a whole thing. We got to do a lot of research for that one.
I wanted to talk about today, but I did want to talk out so I'm going to do some research and get back to you next week.
Are you ready with that outro, my dear?
Oh yeah, let's do that.
Thank you so much to the people that helped us put this intro and outro together. We really appreciate you guys. And thank you to everybody who listened locally at 102.5 FM or
on YouTube or on Twitch.
That's right.
All right, we'll be back next week. You guys stay tuned for the
Sunday Smackdown.
Yeah. Cheers.
Catching one of our live streams on Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube. So I want to play this thing at the end that's the What to the Slave is the 4th of July. It's a bunch of descendants of Frederick Douglass reading Frederick Douglass's speech, and I feel like because it's Frederick Douglass, he probably doesn't swear, right?
Yeah, he's not swearing.
I guess.
We're gonna hope.
I'll just
It'll wipe all the air down.
Yeah, wipe everything, I guess.
It begins a live radio broadcast on KPMF 102.5 FM, America's Most Radio. Find other quality radio shows by the 70-plus volunteer DJs on the station archive at viewamericaраdio.org/shows, or you can stream live 24/7.
Does it smell fresh in here?
We freshened everything. We de-coronavized everything.
Music was composed by Frank Pascal, and a
Smells
special thanks
like
goes to our voice actors:
petrochemical.
Gillian, Colin, Spo,
Oh,
Rosie,
yay.
Ricardo, Vicky, Mokai, and Tony.
Thanks for playing. All right.
Wait for Colin.
Oh, it goes on for a while.
What's outside your reality bubble? I think I dribbled a bit too much.
Done.
In 1852, he was asked to speak in celebration of July.
It's a food bar.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, and allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today?